Computer Aid, where we've been working in partnership with National Meteorological Services in Zambia, Kenya and Uganda, and where we've been working to install computers at district level outstations to improve the digitalisation of data, which Gladys has already mentioned, and to allow people working at in district communities to be able to engage with end users, as with farmers in their communities, and begin to provide some very simple statistical products to them that enable them to help to improve agricultural decision making, and hopefully that leads to better yields and improved food security. So I wanted to start just looking at why the Met Office is involved in this sort of thing. And we've got three main motivations to the sort of capacity development work that we get involved in. The first, which our relationship with Computer Aid forms firmly under, is we're trying to improve the amount of information, and we're trying to improve the science of meteorology and climate research around the world. And that's because it benefits us here in the UK as well. Sustainable Met Services, who deliver services that are relevant to their communities in Africa, produce sustainable observations, which we then use in our weather forecasts and our climate change models to understand how the weather's evolving around the world. And if you look at the map of Africa, it becomes pretty clear that there's not so many observations going on and being collected on a regular basis across Africa. We're part of government, we're what's known as a trading fund of government, and that means that we both support UK government objectives, so I do a lot of work with DFID and FCO to deliver some of their objectives around climate change and disaster risk reduction. And we also work with donors, so we're doing projects around the world with people like UNDP, with people like the World Bank as well. And there's a greater motivation for a lot of people who work at the Met Office to get involved in this type of stuff. And it's certainly what motivates me in the morning, is we're quite a sort of scientific organisation, and as scientists we're working at that edge between science and humanity. And believe it or not, in the UK we want our science to be as useful as possible to people and to make a big difference to their lives. And it's a natural fit for us to be working in Africa and elsewhere in the world to try and take that science and extend that, particularly when we know that our science is useful to people and can make a difference to people's lives. I call this slide the vuvuzela of seamless prediction. But really what it's trying to show you is that there's different things you can do with weather and climate information on different timescales. And you've got this confidence boundary that gets wider as we move forward in time. But the thing to think about is that although that confidence boundary is getting wider and we're less certain about what's going to happen in 50 years' time than we are about the forecast for tomorrow, there's still useful information contained within the predictions that you can produce on all these timescales. And I've just given some examples of different areas in a sort of developing country context where this sort of data can be applied. I'll give you some specific examples. For example, we're working in Egypt, looking at water resources for the River Nile, and we're looking at the 2050s to look at how will climate change impact water resources and hydroelectricity on the River Nile. We're working for DFID on a project called the Climate Science Research Partnership, looking at monthly to decadal prediction, sort of seasons ahead across Africa, trying to help improve farmers' decision making about what varieties to plant, what crops to plant, when to plant. We've got a project that is very dear to my heart in Uganda, where we're working to provide a text message warning service to fishermen on Lake Victoria. Now, something like 5,000 fishermen die each year, drown each year in Lake Victoria, which is a staggering number. So we're working on shorter timescales, maybe 24 hours ahead, to provide warnings on Lake Victoria. But the focus, what I'm going to talk about today, is on the left-hand side, thinking about agriculture in particular. Although there's stuff we can do with agriculture on all timescales, but this particular project we've been working with on Computer Aid is really looking at past observations. You collect observational data, you store it, you use it, and you apply it in certain sectors so that it adds value to people's decision making. So I like this picture because it's a happy farmer. I've just done some posters, and the designers in the Met Office put all these posters with, you know, bad crop failure and that sort of thing. And I threw them all out and Googled this picture and they bought it, so it's gone out, so I'm using it now. So it's a happy farmer because she's got a good crop in front, behind her. And weather and climate information is a useful tool, a useful input for farmers. Okay, now the big farmers will know this. If you talk to Del Monte in Kenya, they've got their own weather stations. They spend a lot of money on weather and climate analysis. You talk to my colleague on the right-hand side who works for Sainsbury's. They're using weather information in their procurement, predicting sales and that sort of thing. So farmers, agriculture, in the food industry, you know, weather and climate is a really important input. We can help farmers know a bit better about when to plant their crop. If farmers in Africa plant their crops and there's a dry spell just after they plant, for a few days after they plant, then that's going to stop their crop, that's going to kill the crop dead, and they've wasted that seed. So if we can say, we think this is the start of the rainy season, and we can say that with some confidence and some skill, then we can help farmers to plant crops and end up with successful yields more often, and that's what we're trying to achieve. If a new crop or variety comes out, all the time there's a lot of investment, you know, now in GM research and that sort of thing, there's always been a lot of investment in new varieties of crops. Some crops are more drought resistant, but they might have a lower yield. So farmers are going to make a very tight decision about A, the type of crop that they plant, and B, the variety of crop that they plant. And we want them to be more successful more often. And by understanding the past climate, using past climate observations, we can help them to do that. We can also provide forecasts when the crop's planted to say, okay, if you want to apply fertiliser, you actually want it to rain the day after you apply fertiliser, so the fertiliser seeps into the soil. If you want to apply pesticide, you don't want it to rain the day after you apply pesticide because it washes it away. So there's all these sorts of decisions that are weather related, and we can help farmers improve their decision making and hopefully maximise their yields. So what we've done in Kenya, Uganda and Zambia in partnership with Computer Aid, and also most importantly in partnership with the Kenya Met Department, the Uganda Department of Meteorology and the Zambia Met Department, to do two things. At their district and provincial offices, we're getting people to enter data, and we're getting them to form a local record of past climate at those levels. And we're also getting them to find themselves some customers from the local community, people who can apply that data. Maybe it's agricultural extension workers, maybe it's farming cooperatives, those sorts of people who they can work with to say, okay, we've got this weather data, we understand these characteristics about the season in this location, okay, how does that relate to what your crop choices are and when you should plant it? It starts with observations. Uganda's got something like 50 observation manned stations. We used to have about 200 in the UK, 200 manned stations across the UK, where you've got these people who are there 24 hours a day, they're collecting observations, but across Africa they're quite poorly motivated and underutilised. They'll produce an observation maybe once every 3 hours, and probably for 2 hours 50 minutes. Every 2 hours 50 minutes they're doing very little, and for 10 minutes they're collecting the observation. So we've worked with these people so that they're not just collecting the observation, but they're also storing that using the computers that we're providing through Computer Aid, creating their own local database and starting to produce new products for their communities. Data management is an important aspect. Climsoft is a climate database. This is a great piece of work. This was led by a Zimbabwean chap, supported by a Kenyan and somebody from Guinea. They produced this climate database in Africa for African Met Services. It's based on Windows Access, but it's built in such a way that the rest of the software is free to use and open source, and that cuts down on the software costs involved in the implementation of these projects. And this allows people to ingest this data at a district level, and then at a headquarters level they build a bigger database with all the different stations around the country. I just want to give you a flavour of the results that we get from this sort of work. This is Zambia. This is a guy I worked with about 6 or 7 years ago. And every week during the rainy season, I get a map, a report sent through to me, telling me how the rains are performing across southern Zambia. Every week since this guy's done a training course with us. And this is a really useful mechanism. So not only is working with farmers, this is the chap here on the right-hand side, and trying to get that message out to the farmers. He's also producing this map, which is a really useful monitoring tool, which is telling the government of the southern province, in the southern province of Zambia at the moment, that actually the rains aren't performing as well as they should, and perhaps there's an issue that they need to be aware of. So finally, Computer Aid has been a really important partner of the Met Office over the last 6, 7, 8 years in trying to help Met Services in several African countries to deliver better services. They're helping us to digitise more data at source, which is improving the quality of the data and increasing the volumes of the data exchanged internationally, which is important to us as an international organisation. These simple statistical products are helping observers feel more motivated at remote sites and help farmers in their local community to increase their chances of delivering a successful yield. So I'd like to finish by saying a big thanks to Computer Aid, and I know there's several partners in the room who have provided their computers which have been used on projects like this one. But I'm saying thanks not on behalf of the Met Office necessarily, although I will say thanks on behalf of the Met Office, but thanks from my colleagues at Kenya Met Department, Uganda Department of Meteorology, and Zambia Met Department, because I know that they really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My name is Glenn. I'm also a trustee of Computer Aid International, and I work for an organisation called BOND, development NGOs in the UK. I wanted to get a sense from you, in one of your presentations you had scalability, and I wanted to get a sense of to what degree you felt that this particular kind of use of ICTs had really begun to penetrate the possibilities around this of really empowering farmers to make choices where they've got access to both information and the kit they need, which obviously will change over time. Are we just scratching the surface in these countries? Are we beginning to get somewhere? This seems like something that's not going to go away, and climate change will make it more and more important in real time. So I just wanted to get a sense for you, for GIFID, for us, for others, how this space might grow in the future, do you think?
I think that's a really interesting and complicated question. I was thinking about this earlier actually, and I think one of the things I would say is at the moment, in terms of the scale of how we can roll things out, I think we're doing as much as we possibly can, given the resources that we have available to make these sorts of things happen. The important aspect to us to make it sustainable is to have the right partners on the ground and have somebody who really owns it on the ground, because that's what makes it successful. And if we're being open and honest about what makes a project successful, is having someone on the ground who gets it and really wants to drive it through. And to build in on Gladys's point, there's a lady in Uganda Met Department, who's absolutely dedicated to this cause. And I happened to be out there on a different mission last year in Uganda, and she took me aside for lunch and she went through all her numbers and she said, this is what I'm doing, and these are the ones that have gone wrong, and this is how I've swapped them out and everything else. And she's absolutely 110% dedicated. And I think the important thing that either limits or is the way that we can manage expansion in these types of projects has to be through those sorts of individuals. We have to have someone like that who is going to make it happen and is motivated on the ground to make it happen. And I think that I would say that's the limiting factor. The chap I showed you in Zambia is another chap who's absolutely dedicated to the cause, and you know, by hook or by crook, he will send me his rainfall analysis for southern province of Zambia every week during the rainy season. And those are the kind of people you have to find in order to make these things successful. So for me, I wouldn't say it's about the limited resources, it's about making sure we've got the people with the right skills on the ground who can make these things work.